The earliness of Paul's traditions is universally agreed because Paul visited Athens and then Corinth in the early AD 50s. And then he wrote a letter to the Corinthians to deal with issues they were struggling with around AD 55. So when Paul says in his letter in AD 55, I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, and then he quotes these traditions about Jesus. He is talking about a visit back in the early AD 50s in which he handed on to them information, traditions about Jesus that he himself had received earlier, probably no later than when he visited Jerusalem and spent 2 weeks with James and with Peter around AD 36. Now, think of this, that's just 6 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. So these traditions that Paul hands on to these Corinthian Christians go back to within the first 5 years after Jesus' death. These are not legends that accrued over the decades and eventually came to be written down in the New Testament. This is among some of the earliest material about Jesus, and it's extraordinary for any figure in ancient history, such as Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great, that we should have information that goes back to within the first 5 years after that person's death. So that would be an example of Paul's information. Now, with respect to the Gospels, most scholars who study Mark think that Mark drew upon a source for Jesus' so-called passion. That is to say, the final week of his life, the week of his suffering and death. This passion source or story is different than the rest of the Gospel of Mark, which consists of little snapshots of Jesus, anecdotes that are not always arranged chronologically. They've been aptly compared to beads on a necklace, which might be strung in a different order. But when you get to the Passion story, it's very different. Now you do have one continuously running narrative of chronologically ordered events leading up through his arrest, trial, crucifixion, and burial. And so scholars think that Mark is drawing upon a very early account of Jesus' passion. Now, Mark is already the earliest of our Gospels. Everyone thinks that Mark was written prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. I think it's highly likely that it was written even earlier than that, maybe the late AD 40s, I would argue. Now, that puts you again within just a couple decades of Jesus' death, and the pre-Mark and Passion story then would go back even closer to the time of Jesus' crucifixion. So we're not dealing again here with legends or tales that have been passed down and handed down over the decades. This is oral history. It goes right back to the time of the eyewitnesses in Jerusalem who experienced these events and who would know whether or not these were accurate accounts.